A flat tire, a wealthy businessman, and a poor boy with a rusty bike. Sounds ordinary, right? But what happened on that lonely road would shock everyone. Because the boy who offered simple help that day had no idea it would unlock a future beyond his wildest dreams. The sun was setting low, painting the sky with strokes of orange and purple as the countryside fell quiet. Birds were retreating to their nests, and the air carried the smell of freshly cut grass. On that lonely stretch of road, a shiny black luxury car suddenly rolled to a stop. The engine purred once, then silenced itself. The hazard lights blinked rhythmically, flashing red like impatient eyes in the dusk. Inside sat Mr. Charles Thompson, a man in his late 50s with sharp features and a reputation for success. He was the kind of businessman who was always in control of meetings, of deals, of people. But at this moment, he was not in control. He stepped out his car, looked down at the rear wheel, and groaned. Flat tire. Unbelievable, he muttered, loosening his tie. Of all the days, why today? He checked his watch. He had an important dinner to attend, a meeting with investors that could change the direction of his company. And now here he was, stuck on a road with no service station in sight. Charles pulled out his phone, but the signal bars were stubbornly absent. He sighed heavily, muttering a string of complaints under his breath. A man of his stature wasn't supposed to be stranded like this. Just then, from the distance, came the faint squeak of an old bicycle chain. A small figure appeared, riding steadily toward him. It was a young black boy, maybe 12 years old. His bicycle was rusty, its paint chipped, the tires thin and worn. His clothes were simple, an old t-shirt with faint stains and shorts that seemed a size too big. His shoes looked secondhand, the soles nearly worn through. Yet, his eyes were bright, full of energy and curiosity. The boy slowed as he approached the stranded car. He glanced at the luxury vehicle, then at the frustrated man standing beside it. Stopping a few feet away, he put one foot on the ground, balanced on the bike, and asked politely, "Mister, do you need help?" Charles turned, sizing up the boy with a look of disbelief. His neatly pressed suit, gold watch, and polished shoes contrasted starkly with the child's worn appearance. The businessman let out a short, bitter laugh. "You," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "What could you possibly do? This is a job for roadside assistance." The boy didn't flinch at the dismissal. Instead, he carefully parked his bike against a tree and walked toward the car. His small hands already reaching for the wheel, he said with quiet confidence, "I've helped my uncle fix cars before. I know what I'm doing. If you let me, I can change that tire faster than anyone you call." Charles hesitated. He wasn't sure if this boy was just naive or actually skilled. His first instinct was to wave him off, but something in the boy's calm determination made him pause. Finally, with a sigh and a shrug, he said, "Fine, show me." And in that moment, neither of them knew that this small act on a deserted road was about to change both of their lives forever. To Mr. Thompson's surprise, the boy moved with a confidence that didn't match his age. He crouched down, examined the wheel carefully, and then reached for the tools with ease. His small hands moved swiftly, loosening the bolts one by one, placing them neatly on the ground so they wouldn't roll away. He set the jack in position, pumped it with steady strength, and raised the car just enough to free the flat tire. The businessman stood there, arms crossed, expecting the boy to fumble at any moment. But that moment never came. David worked with precision, each movement deliberate, as though he'd done this job countless times before. His brows furrowed slightly in concentration, but his face carried a quiet smile, the kind of smile that said, "I know exactly what I'm doing." Within minutes, the flat tire was off, and the spare was in place. He tightened the bolts with steady hands, gave the wheel a final check, and wiped a streak of sweat from his forehead. The orange glow of the sunset lit up his determined expression. When David finally stood, brushing dirt from his knees, the car was back on four good wheels. Mr. Thompson blinked in disbelief, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. "How?" he stammered, his voice softer now. "How did you learn to do that?" David wiped his hands on his faded shirt, leaving smudges of grease across the fabric. But he didn't see. The boy's eyes lit up with excitement as he continued. I love fixing things. It makes me feel like I can solve problems, you know? Like no matter how bad something looks, there's always a way to make it work again. For the first time, Mr. Thompson really looked at the boy, not as some random kid on a rusty bike, but as someone with determination, skill, and a maturity far beyond his years. The worn-out clothes, the oversized shoes, the humble bicycle, they no longer defined him. What stood out now was his work ethic, his confidence, and the quiet pride in his voice. "What's your name, son?" Thompson asked, his tone far less arrogant than before. "David," the boy said, flashing a bright smile. "David Carter." The name lingered in the air. Mr. Thompson repeated it slowly, almost testing the sound. David Carter. There was something about the boy's presence, something refreshing, something rare. He hadn't asked for money, hadn't bragged, hadn't even hesitated to help a stranger who'd mocked him at first. Instead, he'd proven himself through action, not words. As the businessman studied him, a thought flickered in the back of his mind. Perhaps this meeting wasn't just chance. Perhaps it was meant to be. And for the first time that evening, Mr. Thompson felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Respect, not for wealth or power, but for character. Mr. Thompson paused, the crisp $100 bill still pinched between his fingers. In his world, money had always been the answer. Money solved problems, bought loyalty, and opened doors. Yet here stood a boy, sweaty, dirt-streaked, and humble, who refused the very thing that most people would snatch without hesitation. David's words lingered in the evening air like a quiet echo. Do good because it's right, not because you'll be paid. The businessman lowered his wallet slowly, tucking the bill back inside. His sharp, business-hardened expression softened as he studied the boy. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "that you just helped me, a stranger, for nothing?" David shrugged, but there was no hesitation in his voice. "Not for nothing, sir. I helped because you needed it. That's reason enough." Thompson let out a short, stunned laugh. Not mocking, but almost in disbelief. For decades, he'd been surrounded by people who measured kindness in dollars and favors. Yet this boy had done more than fix a flat tire. He had reminded him that genuine goodness still existed in the world. He leaned against the car, curious now. "You said you want to be an engineer, right?" David's eyes brightened, though he tried to keep his voice steady. "Yes, sir. I love cars. I dream about building engines that last forever, or maybe even electric cars that anyone can afford. My uncle says I've got the mind for it." But his words faltered as his gaze dropped to the ground. "College costs a lot. My family barely manages rent and food most months. So I don't know if it's possible." Thompson's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits, deadlines, or deals. He was looking at raw potential, a spark of brilliance that, with the right opportunity, could light up the world. "David," he said slowly, almost thoughtfully, "what if I told you that dreams don't always have to stay dreams?" The boy looked up, confused but hopeful. "What do you mean?" The businessman crossed his arms, his voice carrying a weight it hadn't before. "In my company, I've met dozens of adults who have degrees, experience, and fancy resumes. But very few of them have what you showed me today: heart, determination, and skill. You didn't just fix my car. You show me character, and that's rarer than any diploma." David blinked, unsure how to respond. For the first time, Mr. Thompson smiled, not the polished, businesslike smile he wore in boardrooms, but a genuine one. "Listen," Thompson continued, "I can't promise the future, but what I can do is make sure you get a fair shot at it. If you keep studying, keep working, and keep that attitude, I'll help make college possible for you. No dream is too expensive when it's backed by hard work." The boy's eyes widened, his lips parting in shock. "You'd really do that? For me?" And at that moment, Mr. Thompson realized the truth. The boy had already given him something more valuable than money. He had given him hope. David stood frozen, staring at the thick envelope in Mr. Thompson's hands. For a moment, the world seemed to blur around him. The tiny apartment, the chipped paint on the walls, the faint sound of traffic outside. All of it disappeared. All he could see was the promise of a future he had only dared to dream about. His mother, still holding the door, stepped back in disbelief. "Scholarship? Fully funded? She whispered, almost afraid to say it too loudly in case it vanished like a dream. Mr. Thompson smiled and nodded. Every penny. Tuition, books, supplies, everything. You won't have to worry about how to pay for your education. You just have to focus on learning, growing, and chasing that. David's throat tightened. But why me? I'm just a kid from the neighborhood. Lots of kids need help. You could have picked anyone. Thompson's voice softened, but there was a conviction in it that filled the room. Because, David, when I was stranded on that road, you didn't see a millionaire. You didn't see someone who could reward you. You just saw a man in need, and you helped. No hesitation, no expectation. That kind of heart is rare. And if someone like you wants to build a future, then I'll do everything I can to make sure you have the tools to do it. David's mother wiped her tears, her hands trembling as she took the scholarship papers. Sir, you don't know what this means for us. We've prayed for an opportunity, but this is beyond anything we imagined. Thompson glanced around the humble home, the second-hand furniture, the worn-out carpet, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. He wasn't judging. Instead, he felt a quiet respect. This was a family that had very little, yet had raised a boy with more integrity than many adults he knew. He looked back at David, whose wide eyes still shimmered with disbelief. Listen to me, David. This envelope doesn't guarantee success. You do. Scholarships and money are just tools. What matters is your dedication, your perseverance, and the kindness you've already shown. If you hold on to that, there's nothing you can't achieve. David finally found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. I won't waste this chance. I promise, sir. I'll work harder than ever. I'll make you proud. I'll make my mom proud. Thompson placed a hand on his shoulder. You already have, son. You already have. For a long moment, silence filled the apartment, broken only by the sound of David's mother sobbing softly, overwhelmed with gratitude. Outside, life went on as usual, but inside that small apartment, something extraordinary had happened. A boy with a rusty bicycle had just been handed the keys to his future. And as Mr. Thompson turned to leave, he smiled to himself. He had built companies, earned millions, and signed deals that made headlines. But somehow, this small act, believing in a boy with a dream, felt like the most important investment he had ever made. Years later, the sound of cheers filled a massive auditorium draped in blue and gold. Bright stage lights shone down on rows of graduates in caps and gowns, their tassels swaying as they waited for their names to be called. Among them stood David Carter, taller now, his shoulders broader, but his eyes carried the same determination he'd had as a 12-year-old boy fixing a stranger's flat tire. The banner above the stage read, Graduation, School of Engineering. In the front row sat his mother, her hands clasped together, tears streaming down her face. She clapped so hard her palms stung, but she didn't care. For her, this was more than just a ceremony. It was the realization of a dream she once thought impossible. Beside her sat Mr. Thompson, impeccably dressed as always, though there was something different about him now. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman anymore. To David, he had become a mentor, a guide, almost like a second father. As he watched David walk across the stage to receive his diploma, his chest swelled with pride. This was no ordinary achievement. It was proof that kindness, when invested in the right heart, could create ripples far greater than wealth or success. When David's name was announced, the crowd roared. Cameras flashed, classmates whistled, and his mother covered her mouth, sobbing with joy. Thompson stood to his feet, applauding louder than anyone else, his eyes glistening. After receiving his diploma, David stepped up to the podium to deliver his speech. He adjusted the microphone, his hands steady, his voice strong. When I was 12 years old, he began, I thought I was just helping a man change his flat tire. What I didn't know was that act of kindness would change the course of my life. The audience leaned forward, listening intently. David continued, that day I learned something important. Kindness has power, real power. You never know when helping someone might open a door for you, or for them. My future wasn't fixed by money or luck. It was fixed by a choice I made, to help when I could, without expecting anything in return. He paused, his eyes finding his mother in the front row. Then he looked at Mr. Thompson, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. David smiled, then said, "Dreams can seem impossible. They can feel too big, too far, too expensive. But I stand here today as proof that no dream is too big if you have determination, support, and a willingness to do what's right." I want to dedicate this moment to my mother, who taught me integrity, and to Mr. Thompson, who believed in me when he didn't have to. The crowd erupted in applause, some even standing to cheer. His words echoed long after he left the stage. And so, David Carter, once just a boy on a rusty bicycle, became more than an engineer. He became a living reminder that sometimes the smallest good deed doesn't just fix a tire. It can fix a future. David's story proves that one small act of kindness can change everything. If you believe the world needs more stories like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs a little inspiration today.